So thank you everyone for coming out. My name again is Dennis Baker. I'm the business program director. A reason we do things is one, to hear from the filmmakers about their process, but also encouragement for you as actors and filmmakers to create your own works. So hopefully you learn from them and how they did it to inspire you. And the way we're gonna get started is have you guys introduce yourselves. So go for it.
Hi, my name is Scotty Crowe. I was an actor and one of the producers on the film.
Hi, I'm Thor, and I was the director and one of the producers on the film as well.
So as we know, it takes an army, a village, a tribe, however you want to say it, to make a film happen, and some of them are here in the audience. So cast and crew, you want to acknowledge?
Yeah, we have two of our leads. I know Dan O'Brien is in the back, who played James, and Nuria, where are you? Oh, there you are. Nuria is right there, who played Astraea. She has bangs now, so you might not recognize her.
So it always starts with story and script, because you can't make a film without that. So you want to start there and just kind of talk about where the story came from and how to kind of get into script form?
Sure. So the writer Ashlyn Halfnight had this idea brewing around in his mind for a little while, and Chris and I had just wrapped this other film that Ashlyn also wrote called Diving Normal, and that was a movie where we were running around New York nonstop, and this very sort of guerrilla filmmaking style of making a movie. And Ashlyn came up at the wrap party and said that he had a really, really simple little movie idea where we just have 2 locations and 4 characters, and it'll be really inexpensive and quick to shoot. So he's like, "Do you want to do it again?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." But then we found out that this one was so much more ambitious than Diving Normal ever was. So it started with just this attempt to try to make a really simple film, and then once we got into it, we realized how much more complicated it was.
And once you got into it, he was the sole writer, but did you guys kind of go through drafts with him, kind of how that process, or did he was just kind of on his own in the writing phase?
He had a very strong vision from the start, but we had sort of really wanted to try to take the genre, and one of the ideas we had sort of had from the very beginning is to have a genre film that kind of broke a lot of the ideas of what a post-apocalyptic film would be. So how do you take this genre that's always full of like zombies nipping at your feet and sort of actually ask the real questions of what would happen in that scenario and play with a lot of the psychology as well. The joke was that we wanted to make an Ingmar Bergman film in the post-apocalyptic world, so that was sort of the idea.
And then how long was that process of kind of working on the scripts, get it going? Did you guys start pre-production during that process, or did you kind of wait till the script was kind of had more drafts down the road?
I think we pretty much started prepping as soon as we decided to make the movie. So it was a simultaneous process of revising the script and then also starting to plan where we were going to shoot. We knew we wanted to try to shoot somewhere to get a tax incentive because it was independent filmmaking, and we needed snow cover for the duration of the shoot. So that kind of came down to Michigan or Maine. So just going through that process of trying to decide where our location was, and also I'm in LA and the other producers are all in New York, so it's not like any of our like home turf. So that took a couple months, and then trying to build out our crew and hire our leads and hire our department heads. There was just so much to do, so I think that we kind of started the prep as soon as we could.
So talk a little bit about the other main producers on board, who they were, and then kind of how did you guys kind of figure out job responsibilities in the kind of beginning phases of that?
One of the things that we knew we wanted to do right away was make an environment that was a little bit like camp, you know what I mean? Because we knew we were going to be in the middle of nowhere, and so we wanted to create a community that was only invested in making the film, and nobody would be going back to their apartments or checking. Thank God. One of the great things about shooting where there's no service is that nobody can check their iPhones, so they actually pay attention to their jobs all the time, which is awesome. So I think that was no, seriously, it was the first day. Everybody was like holding up their iPhones, like looking for service, and they all looked like drug addicts who had lost their. And then all of a sudden, and everybody was like, I guess I'll just pay attention to my job. And, and things started moving faster. The other thing I will say about location and why we decided to do that, which I think is important for independent filmmaking, was we found this idea of if you shoot a post-apocalyptic film in the snow, all the bodies are buried in the snow, and so there were sort of ways of intelligently creating an environment, because a post-apocalyptic film is usually very expensive, and we found that was why we chose that. I don't think I answered your question.
How in the beginning phases, I'm gonna repeat it
It's
sort of.
because he has his cell phone with him. He can't concentrate.
But it's just the idea of like, because you guys had producing partners who you guys all worked together. So was it kind of like you already had a language of, okay, this producer is going to start heading down this road, this producer is going to start heading down this road and getting these tasks done? Just how can you divvy up work?
Yeah, it seemed to me that I had a working relationship on the previous film with Ashlyn, the writer, and Kristjan, the director. And then Jessica Cummings, the other producer, had a really close relationship working with them in New York theater and some other projects as well. So we all knew each other really well, and I think when we all came together as producers, Ashlyn ran with mostly script stuff and creative development in terms of look and feel and character. Chris got really deep into overall, you had locations in mind and looks in mind and the tone in mind. And then Jessica and I essentially split half and half a lot of the on-set producerial duties. So we didn't have a line producer to start, so we basically did the budget and the schedule and tried to work on all the hiring and securing the locations. So we'd kind of hear from Ashlyn and Chris on what we needed, and then the two of us would try to execute it in addition to learning the lines.
Yeah, keep in mind they're doing that while they're performing in the film, so it was pretty impressive what they were doing.
But that was essentially our division of labor.
Nice, and we'll talk about on-set producing and acting in a moment, because that's multiple hats. Talk a little bit about your department heads. How'd you build out your team? We talked a little bit about it, but who'd you reach out to? Who did you know? That type of thing.
The DP, Matt and I had worked together. We'd all worked together on Diving Normal, and we sort of also had an idea of trying to be as local as possible. So we were able to get sound and our gaffer from the area, and they were also able to bring in a fair number of local hires. So that was one of the things too that happens when you go into Maine, is that the tax breaks aren't so great, but everybody has knows someone who can get the thing, and so it's sort of, there is a small town feel up there. So having local department heads was really, really helpful. And I think that the other thing too is that when you go to those communities, those department heads allow the community to want to help you. We'd have police officers roll up, and being ready in New York, when a police officer rolls up, you're like, "I'm so sorry, officer, we're not doing anything wrong." There, they'd be like, "You need a cop in your film," you know what I mean, or something like that. So it was a really lovely, lovely sort of way to make a film.
And you mentioned Matt. I just want to say Matthew Mendelson was our DP, and he's responsible for the way the film looks, which I think is beautiful. So I think he deserves a round of applause, if we can. And he also brought in James Bolenball, who was our production designer. And Chris and Jess had done this 2,000-mile road trip doing location scouting. So they found a lot of these buildings that we were in that were kind of ready to go. But James Bolenball was responsible for all the production design and all the props and set dressings, and it's also amazing. So both of those guys were really special.
Clap it out, yeah. So with indie filmmaking, money is always the big question of how you're going to pay for it. Talk a little bit, did you guys do Kickstarter? Did you guys do private funding? Talk a little bit about the process of trying to raise up some money for this.
From the outset, we tried to make the film without crowdfunding. So essentially, we asked everybody that we knew and got a collection of private investors to help us fund the film. So it was mostly that, people who bought a stake in the film and have been cheerleaders for us and champions for us all the way through. And then, of course, out-of-pocket expenses, as independent film producers are wont to do. But yeah, we sort of made ends meet through those two processes.
How important was it to have a kind of a feature under your belt saying, hey, we've done one, trust us to do another one? Was that helpful? I
think that was exactly why everything went to Astraea right afterwards. I mean, literally at the wrap party, like Scotty said, we decided to make it. And so I think also we had everyone who we were asking to support the film financially had just seen us succeed with just a sort of a very small amount of money. So I think being able to just flip it immediately actually helped the momentum continue on.
Let's talk a little bit about casting with a room full of actors here. You being an actor and also having other producers, actors, in the writing process, did you have the other actors in mind, or you're like, you know what, we're just going to write and then deal with it in casting and go that route?
It was interesting because we knew that Scotty and Jess were going to be in the film. It was sort of, you had this very strong known quantity that was influencing how the rewrites were going and how sort of we were thinking about the film. And then we got, Dan came on very late in the game, actually. And the funny story with Dan is that Dan O'Brien and Jess Cummings had done a play together that I directed that was written by Ashlyn Halfnight maybe 5 years prior or something like that. Also, that play is where Ashlyn and Jess met and got married there shortly thereafter. So it was sort of incredibly, awesomely incestuous. And then the search for our lovely banged lady is Astraea was the hardest role, obviously, and we saw 1 million people. And Ashlyn and I had taught a class at New York Conservatory of the Dramatic Arts where Nuria was going at the time, and we both had immediately flagged her as a wonderful, awesome human being and actor. And so she was always on our list, but we kept sort of opening it up and seeing who we could find, and we always kept coming back to her. And so in the end, it was her, and she was still in school. So we had to fly her back and forth from New York to Maine maybe 5 times through the shoot. So she was literally flying back and forth, going to school so that she wouldn't get kicked out of school while we were shooting it. And there were a lot of times where the school would call me because I was a teacher there. They'd chew me out, be like, "You can't take our fucking actor out of school to do a feature," you know. And I was like, "This is a really good thing for her career." So it was like a big experience and sort of story. But she was an incredible rock star and had never done any piece of film really before that. So it was her debut, and she really killed it.
Nice. Congratulations to you both. Yeah. From a director point of view, and then also from an actor point of view, being on the other side of the table, what's your advice for actors auditioning? What would you encourage them to keep in mind, to not worry about, to focus on, that type of stuff?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I would say, I mean, it's everything I'm going to say is probably going to sound trite, but I do think that the way you present yourself as truthfully as you can to the human being in front of you before all acting and all sort of being the right person for the role or the right look for the role. Like for me, the human being in front of me is the person I want to have a relationship with and who I want to collaborate with. So I think being able to sort of find whatever that is in the horribly awkward, awful audition process, which there is just no way around, but if you can find sort of humanity inside of that, I think people will really recognize it. And it's a difficult thing to do, but I think once you find it, you realize that, oh, this is just about 2 people meeting each other, not people posturing for something, right? And I think being able to differentiate between those 2 things is super important.
I mean, I guess my secret is if I produce something, I can cast myself in it. But I don't know if anybody here has ever worked in a casting office or interned in a casting office before, but I did that a number of years ago, and it was such a rewarding experience. And there's a takeaway that I learned there that I've found in the room as we were auditioning people for this film, and that's that, and this is such a hard thing to learn because I relearn it every week, but it's that, like, it's so far out of our hands, you know, and like the decisions that are being made in a room full of people who are often deciding on something that is so trivial in the moment. So it's like, this person's too tall, or this person's hair is too long, or we didn't make decisions like that, but those are the conversations that I think are happening in these rooms. And I think that as an actor, I think being in the casting office and hearing that and be like, oh, that guy would cut his hair, but that's just the decision that was made at the time, you know? And then I think it's so hard, I think, as a producer on any level to really make a final decision. And so I think as an actor, we do the best work we can, and we hope that it clicks in the best way possible. But for me, it was really helpful because I was able to let go of some anxiety about walking into rooms and then walking out and feeling okay with myself.
Let's talk a little bit about production. How many days did you guys shoot? Did you guys rehearse it all? It was camp, but how did that kind of come into it?
We shot 18 days of principal, and how many did we figure out?
I think we ended up with like 7 or 8 pickup days.
Yeah, and the shooting days were incredibly long. We were sort of starting at dawn and going all day long. A lot of the conditions also, as you can imagine, were super, super difficult. So rehearsal was unfortunately not as much as we would have wanted. You know, we were like, we're gonna be at like camp and we're gonna work all night long in front of the fireplace, and then inevitably everybody was doing so much producing work sort of whenever we weren't shooting that we didn't have a lot of time to rehearse. But one of the things that we did do with Matt, our DP, is we actually sort of added in a rehearsal earlier with the keys. So what would normally be a blocking rehearsal actually kind of started to take a little bit of a longer, larger process. Not so much wasting time, but letting everybody sort of see what the actions were and what we were really, what the story points that we were trying to tell were, but letting that creative process open up to some of our keys. Actually, and especially because we were so often in the same room, it actually made the room feel a little bit more sort of organic and lovely. So our rehearsals actually kind of what we would have normally have done before shooting, we actually were doing during our blocking rehearsals, which actually ended up being helpful, I think.
Talk a little bit about finding the places where you shot, because it sounded like it was a huge process and very time consuming. So kind of talk about that journey of, you know, I mean, there's a lot of outdoors, a lot of that kind of stuff. Where do you start? Where do you look? Where do you find?
It was the search for that house, actually, because on the Maine film website, which is not the most robust website, although they were amazing. The Maine film department was awesome, but they had this antiquated sort of like listing system on which was a red house on a lake, and I had been like, it has to be a red house on a lake, and I really got obsessed with finding this place. And Jess Cummings, who plays Callie and is a producer, we drove from New York a total of 2,000 miles, driving all throughout Maine to find this goddamn house. And then at the end, we found out roughly where it was, and we went to the town hall. And there was sort of like a little old lady in like a small Maine town with like a seriously like a ledger from like, you know, like Harry Potter or some shit. Like it's just this huge book. And I was like, I have to find out where this house is. And she was like, I can't give you anything. You know what I mean? That's against the law. So I swear on my life, I basically was like, what's that? And she literally turned around, walked to the back of the room, and I snapped a picture of the ledger and then cold called the people whose place it was. And they were amazingly so generous. They ended up being like the greatest people. Like they would come up and like throw us pig roasts during the shoot and all that kind of stuff. So it ended up being for the best, but it was not my, like the highlight of my, it was sort of a bad person thing to do.
But by any means necessary, right? The other side of it is that house ended up being in a very, very small rural town in the middle of Maine. And so we knew that we needed a certain type of location, and there weren't an infinite number of places to go, you know, so we needed like a market/grocery store. There are literally 3 options within a 45-minute radius. So it was just a matter of going and telling these people that we were shooting a movie, and would they let us shut down their place for half a day? And most often they just said yes because they were really excited to do it. So that was another advantage to shooting in a place that's not used to a lot of film production.
Talk about kind of on production, wearing multiple hats as producers, directors, actors. How did that balance out? Like you talked a little bit about it, but can you dig a little deeper in the sense of how'd you make it all work and still got the performances you wanted and still were able to get everything that you needed to get done?
I mean, I'd love to also hear what Scotty has to say. I think by the end, we started getting much better at it. There was a learning curve for us trying to figure out how to sort of not make everybody crazy, you know what I mean? Because especially for the actors, so to give them sort of a sacred place for a little bit of time, be like, stop producing for a second, take a moment, take a breath. But I think at first it was such a whirlwind, and we were trying to get so many pages a day that we would just be like, and now we're gonna shoot this, you know what I mean? And inevitably, those are a lot of the scenes that I think got cut. And I think the times where we were able to find breath beforehand and just everybody take a moment, you know what I mean? Forget about like that we don't have a location tomorrow, try to focus on your partner right now. Those kinds of things I think we found more and more. And if I were to do anything over again, I wish I had known I wish I'd known how powerful that would have been from the very beginning.
Yeah, I was going to say it's tough being an actor and a producer, because I think ultimately the film always feels like it's a higher priority than whatever scenes I was supposed to shoot over the course of the day. So all these production needs and shortfalls and fires that you would have to put out would come up, and it would just seem like, I can learn the scene 30 minutes before and I can do that. And so ultimately you try to compartmentalize. I try to compartmentalize, but it's very, very difficult. So that I think is a lesson that I thought I learned on the first film, and then I came back and I didn't really learn. But it's tough, and I think that coming in with a small crew and independently producing it, you're sort of faced with those decisions, and ultimately you have to make it work, right? Like the film has to be made, and also your scenes have to be shot. So I just thought it was sort of a daily balance all the time. That led to very little sleep, probably, but
I think also, you know, it's an interesting thing to live in the places where you're shooting, because the two locations, the sort of, as we called it, the log cabin of love, and then the Maine red house, those were also where everybody was being housed. So there was sort of an intimate relationship, and I think while there were so many times for me, I lived at the red house overnight, and I could sort of shot list on set, you know what I mean, in the middle of the night, sort of if I was wondering about where to do it. But the other side of it is I think there's a little bit of like going stir crazy and be like, I want to get out of this fucking place. You know what I mean? And that starts to become something that that was a balance that I think we were all playing with as well, the cabin fever of the whole experience.
Can you give us some context to maybe some behind the scenes of certain shots, or dog had to stop barking for 5 seconds, or whatever the case may be, to kind of get that final product that we see?
So we really did cut a hole in the lake, and we really did throw them into it. And it was a pretty horrible experience for these guys. And so I think that was one of those things where a lot of my friends who had worked in film before had seen the script, and they'd be like, you guys can't do this on the budget you guys have. But we woke up at 4 a.m, got some augers, and just drilled holes in the lakes, and literally the writer and me hacked a hole in the lake, and then we put these guys in dry suits, and it was just, it was the one gesture that we knew that we needed to sort of feel real and be real. And I think we all sort of shook hands, be like, we're gonna do this for a couple hours, it's gonna be horrible, everyone's gonna hate everybody, and then we're gonna move on. So I think that was probably the most challenging behind the scenes day we did.
If I can just talk about the dry suit situation real quick. Has anyone ever worn a dry suit? It's awesome because it keeps you dry, but it's basically like putting on a windbreaker and then putting your arm into 30-degree water. So it's extremely cold. And we had a SAG stunt coordinator and an EMT and everybody there to make sure it was very safe. But I grew up in Southeast Georgia, and I live in Southern California now, so like I'm not used to cold weather. Like this is like the first snow I had seen. Like it was the first like frozen lake I'd ever been on in my entire life. So it was a little fish out of water, ice water. So anyway, on that day, the way a dry suit works is it's got these neoprene cuffs on you. They basically seal out all the water, and it's also around your neck as well. And so you wear sweats underneath it, and you stay warm, and then it keeps you dry. So right before we go in, the SAG coordinator is like, let me just tighten up your cuffs. And as he does, he rips the neoprene out of my right cuff. He's like, it's totally fine, we'll just duct tape it. I was like, yeah, let's just duct tape it. Like, wraps it in duct tape so I can't move my arm. I get in the water, immediately feel like cold water, soaking all of my clothes that are on underneath it. And the other thing is the EMT had given me these like latex gloves to wear under my actual gloves to do the same thing. And after the first take, I'm like moving my hands to make sure that I've still got blood flow, and I'm doing this, but my hand looks like this. So it's like not moving at all. And then I realized that the latex gloves the EMT had given me had filled up with freezing water, and were just like basically marinating my fingers in ice water. So yeah, we threw them in dry suits, and we just did it, and it was totally cool.
I gotta say, Scotty is the nicest human being of all time. And after that shoot, he was in by the fire, and everybody was getting lunch. And I came in, and I was like, "Hey, Scotty, how are you?" And I just got a stare back, just a cold, like, no good, no bad, just a stare. And I was like, "Got it, I'm gonna leave you by the fire for a little bit longer."
You sit there. You don't move. Let's transition into a little bit about kind of post-production. How did you feel you guys set up pre and production to help you in post, or did you feel you didn't set up enough? Kind of talk about the process of moving into post, and did you feel you'd set yourself up well?
I think we could have done a lot more on post, and we learned a lot. I think the one thing that happened for us is that we had we sort of needed to raise a little bit more money to finish post, which was a little bit of a difficult scenario, and obviously one doesn't recommend it for anybody, but at the same time, that's what we had, and we already had the film in the can, so we had to do it. One of the things that happened for us is that this film is radically reordered from the original script. And after having spent so much time in post and sort of forcing circle pegs into square holes, we realized that we really wanted to take a little bit more of a sort of Terrence Malick style quality to the whole thing, and this idea of voiceover and seeing the empty world. So we, about 3 or 4 months, I think, into post, decided that we knew we wanted to do reshoots to shoot the sort of empty world, which is a lot of the first 20 minutes of the film. And then upon deciding that, we knew we had to wait an entire year to get the winter again. So that sort of changed the schedule, but I do think the silver lining to that was the fact that we knew that we had so much time that we really got to let everything, to see everything, let everything sit, and got a much better film because of that sort of additional almost full year that we added to the post schedule. So it was frustrating, but at the same time, I think the film actually came out much better because of it.
The other thing that we sort of did just on a technical standpoint was, and I wish we'd done more of this, is we hired assistant editors to start transcoding footage and basically preparing it for the editor when we found them. And we tried to find an editor while we were still shooting, because the idea is that that person can start to put the film together like as we're shooting. So I talked to people that have said that that's incredibly productive, and then a month after you wrap, you actually have an assembly of the film, which I think in the indie filmmaking world can be incredibly valuable, but you've got to find your editor when you're hiring all of your other department heads as well. So we weren't able to do that, but we did basically walk away 2 weeks after the film with all the footage ready to turn over to somebody, which really helped a lot.
Talk a little bit about once you were getting to the end of post-production and kind of going, okay, how should we submit this to festivals? Where should we submit it? Kind of what was the conversation around getting it out there?
Sure. You know, there's like the main festivals that well, the state of Maine, but because we did go there. But there are these primary festivals, you know, there's Sundance, Tribeca, South by, Toronto, that I think are these sort of big marquee festivals that we apply to, and I'm sure every film applies to. And but outside of that, we knew that we had a film that we wanted to share with people, so we kind of just put our heads together and put this big spreadsheet together of festivals that we'd enjoy going to, or that films on this level had screened at before, and ended up getting into a lot of those. I think we've screened at 16 or 17 festivals at this point, which is kind of amazing. And I think that part of that is the film itself, but attached to that is what Chris had said about it being a genre film. And I think this is really valuable advice, that the fact that it's an easy sell in terms of it's being a post-apocalyptic story means that people want to see it. And I think that the fact that Chris and Ashlyn had approached this post-apocalyptic world in a different way, and it's a character-driven drama, is like a sneaky way for people to like see the film, and then we have like a greater, more meaningful story attached to it. But I think both in terms of a writing standpoint and then also distribution and festivals, it really helped that we had something that people could point to and have a very specific idea that they knew what that was. And then I guess just in terms of festivals, we wanted stuff that we could get the film seen and exposed, and then also ideally people would see it who wanted to help us put the movie out in some way or another.
And, go ahead.
I think also going to a lot of festivals is a great thing, and I think sometimes people get very precious about which festivals they're choosing, but some of the smaller festivals were they were great experiences for all of us, and we made a lot of relationships, and it wasn't dissimilar to, you know, the way people going to a convention, if you're a travel agent or whatever you do, if that you go to conventions to meet your colleagues. And I think that during Astraea, because we did go to so many festivals, some of the ones that were smaller ended up being much more beneficial, I think, to us as filmmakers, not necessarily for the film in terms of notoriety or something like that, but I do think sometimes just making relationships is something to not take for granted when applying to festivals.
And to give a little bit of people context, we were talking about this in the green room. When was your first day of production?
I can look backwards. So what I did was I found our call sheet from March 1st, 2013, which is here. And this was day 7. So I used to be good at math. But I think it's like February 24th, maybe-ish, would have been at day 1. Yeah. But basically 3 years ago today, we were shooting in the snow. Nuria, you're on the snowmobile. snowmobile crash, and then a lot of the stuff where they're talking on the lake, ice fishing. But yeah, I was like, oh, we were shooting in March. I bet I have the call sheet from that day. So.
That saying, it's been 3 years since production that you've been with this film, and you've been it's been a part of your life and working on it. Talk a little about that process of if someone commits to a film, really what are they committing to doing when they say that we're going to make an independent feature film?
I'll say the thing that is still surprising is how after you're done, you're not done at all. And I think that still takes me by surprise, especially coming from the world of theater where you spend so much time building the thing, and then once it's open, it's sort of open. Whereas, you finish shooting it, you're like, God, that was awesome. We're so great. And then it's like, oh, Jesus, there's 2 more years of this. And so I think I think having the mental preparation for that is super important, and actually building in excitement for that. There's a way to, I think, design it in a way that will make you more will make you attack it more aggressively rather than as sort of like, oh man, I have to go back into post. You know what I mean? Like, you can be a little bit more proactive about it if you know that from the very beginning.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think when you sign on to do an independent film as a above the line producer, director, or writer, I think you're committing every aspect of your life to the project for, I think at the very least, 3 years, likely more, because not only are you prepping the film and making the film, and that stuff is so highly demanding, but then you have this post process, and then you have this process of trying to get it distributed. And then if you have a distributor, you're working with the distributor for months and months and months on getting it out. And then once it's out, you're trying to market the film and have people see it. So it really, I think it has to be a passion in your heart and your mind and your body, because it is so comprehensively demanding, and it helps to have, like Chris said, be in the right space to do it and a really good team around you to work on it, because otherwise you're kind of putting everything else on your life on hold in a lot of ways, and you have to make sure that the reason for that is a very positive one.
Right. So you got distribution.
We did.
So do you have a release date that you'd like to share with the audience, or is that unknown yet? Is it not official?
We have an unofficial approximate release date of late April, early May.
Excellent. So keep your ears out for that. We like to end on kind of a golden nugget question. Yeah, you can clap that out. That's good. We kind of like to end with a golden nugget question. I'm going to get a little specific with this. I would like to hear from you guys producing, directing, and however you want to answer it. What did you learn from the last feature film that led you to do this feature film a certain way, and then what did you learn from this feature film that would then move you on to your next project?
Yes, I'm going to say 2 quick things.
Say as many as you need.
100 quick things. No. The first thing is, on the first film, so much was haywire, and it was my first time as a producer. It was my first time as a lead in a film, and like I said, we were shooting in New York with very little resources and very little time, and I came up with this response to everything that it's all going to be great. Like, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's all going to be great, because tensions and stress get so high during these types of things. And we carried that over to Astraea, and that was like our production room, motto. And I think it really helped us get through it, because it's not this delusional type of optimism, but it's this idea that we've dedicated ourselves to do this, and we have a team that's on our side. Everybody's on our side, so it's all going to be great. And I think that will be the consistent thing on any project that I ever work with, because I think you have to have that mindset. The other thing is, we did this a little bit on both films without really intending to, but I think that my main charge, if I were producing another film, would be to try to create a team, like a cast and a crew that is as inclusive as possible. And I think that to be independent filmmakers and to have the flexibility to hire who we want and cast who we want, I think that it's really important, even given all the conversations that have happened over the past few months, to make the people that we're working with as representative of the country or the world that we want to live in. And I think that for me, that's a very important takeaway that is also going to hold true with any projects that I have in the future.
Oh, that was incredibly articulate. Mine's gonna sound like total poo. I would say one thing that I think finding the people, right, and really finding collaborators that you believe in more and more. You can't ever be like, oh yeah, well if you're just gonna bring that person on, great. You know what I mean? We don't have that person, and we only have a few more weeks. Like, make sure you meet that person. Make sure you have a cup of coffee or a beer with that person. No matter sort of really where they live. Obviously, if you're making a gigantic film, you can't do that, but on an indie, you can. And I think it's important to have that relationship, and also for everybody going into the film to know that that is how they're being viewed as a collaborator, even if they're wherever they lie on the totem pole. I think from Diving Normal to Diving Normal, I was very reactionary. I was sort of felt like I was constantly trying to solve problems rather than sort of promote, I hate the word vision, but a vision to the thing, because it was sort of chaotic. And that ended up being a wonderful thing for that film. But then in Astraea, we were a little bit more proactive about saying, hey, I love this Andrew Wyeth watercolor. I really want this. I want everybody to see this. But I think I was mostly showing it to the actors, the DP, and the production designer, for instance. And it was sort of like when we'd hit a roadblock, that's what I'd go to. What I would love to do next time is actually fold that in before the film starts, have everybody see this watercolor or whatever the sort of arty-farty thing that I decide is, and then have that as a touchstone for everybody moving forward in the process, so that that process is actually inclusive in everybody top to bottom. That would be something that's super important. And then I guess the only other thing I would say is that coming from the theater, when we were doing Diving Normal, sometimes something would feel off in the room, and I would not say anything about it because I was out of a little bit of fear. I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? It was my first film, and I wanted everybody to like me. And then I think in Astraea, I was much more aggressive, but I don't think even enough of, like, when you hear something, name it and be incredibly transparent about it with everybody. Otherwise, it festers like a horrible wound, and then you have to deal with something later, and it's grown into something much worse. So I think particularly from a sort of a directing point of view, or really any collaborator, constantly paying attention to giving litmus tests to how everybody's feeling and what the room is like, because I think nipping those things in the bud is absolutely the most helpful thing you can do in an environment, especially if you're like locked in a house in northern Maine. You know what I mean? But I think, it's true of all shoots, I think.
Nice. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing?
Totally.
I just want to say that I've sat in this room so many times and watched movies and seen conversations up here, and to be sitting up here now and have a room full of people watch a film that we made, just like that feels like the most supreme accomplishment of like all the work that we're talking about that we put in. And I just want to say, thank you to Dennis and the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, everybody for coming and checking it out, because it is this like, it feels like such an accomplishment, and I'm just so thankful that you guys took your evening and came and saw the movie, and you've been such a warm, wonderful audience. So thank you for warming my heart.
Got that out. I think that's a great place to end. So thank you all. Thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Do please fill out those surveys, hand them out, and they'll be around to say hi and tell them how awesome of a job they did. So thanks.